So before we begin our presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which Laura and I are meeting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and also any other cultures that might be with us online today. So we're getting together to talk about the LDAT toolkit on alcohol, other drugs and young adults. So what we'll do is, initially I'll just mention where our toolkits are located on the Community Hub website. So if you go to the Community Hub and then hover your mouse over the plan tab up the top, you'll see a bunch of menu options drop down, and toolkits and webinars are in the same place. There's also some key resources for LDATs available under plan as well, so you can find all the good stuff in that one location. If you can't find anything at any point, obviously reach out to your relationship manager and they'll be able to help you find the resources that you need. So today we'll go over the overview of the toolkit. We'll look at the various toolkit sections, obviously, as part of that, and we'll delve a little bit deeper into the risk and protective factors associated with this particular group.
Yep.
And we'll just touch on the various LDAT resources that are available to you when working with this target audience.
Mm-hmm. And as always, you know, people can type a question or just unmute themselves and hop in, Definitely. Make a comment at any time, really.
We'd really love conversation to flow if that's what you'd like to do today. The whole reason that we've moved to this sort of Skype meeting format is because we'd like to provide a bit more of an opportunity for this to be less didactic, I guess, and more conversational and collaborative. So feel free to jump in at any time. Okay.
Yeah, so for the alcohol, other drugs, and young adults, you know, we've kept the same structure as with the other toolkits for consistency. So the overview, and then planning, map your steps, and measuring your success. So in terms of the overview, it's pretty much why are we focusing on this demographic? So when we say young adults, we don't, you know, we're looking at people who are finishing school and maybe going to tertiary education, entering the workforce, moving on to that next stage of their life. And this is a big period of transition and adjustment for a lot of people. You know, it might be your first full-time job, maybe you're moving away from home to go to university or to go to TAFE. A lot of people living in rural and regional areas previously might be moving into the cities for different kinds of opportunities. And, you know, that's a really big change in somebody's life. We'll talk a little bit more about how that can be a risk factor later in the presentation, but we also see in this age group there is some correlation with the development of both mental health and substance issues. So it's a good time to try to get in there a little bit early and also prevent some maybe harmful patterns of alcohol and other drug use from being formed in these years, so that people can form and maintain those good habits for the rest of their life. Also, we see a couple of good opportunities in terms of accessing this cohort. So whether that's through a workplace setting or it's through a school setting, there are a couple of good avenues where you can really talk to that age group and link in with some other partners who might already be working in that space. Mm-hmm. So with the planning, of course, we encourage our LDATs to identify an evidence-based activity. We do recognize in this space it's going to be really dependent on exactly who you're looking to talk to. You know, if it's young adults just entering the workforce or if it's your local TAFE, it's going to be very dependent, as it always is, on your local environment and what your needs analysis is telling you. But we do, especially when it comes to this one, we encourage people to think outside the AOD sector. So there might be other health and well-being programs generally working, mental health support, or like social engagement programs like clubs or, you know, organizations of people who are involved in a similar hobby. There's lots of different organizations that you might be able to partner with, and that you might also be able to bring together to form networks between them as well.
And it'll be really driven by community too. There might be, if it's a regional, remote sort of area, there might be one particular group that's really heavily community focused. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it depends again on that geographic influence as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But really having a broad scope of who you would consider as potential partners or potential programs that you might want to link in with. The setting your objectives, there's been a little bit of change to that, so you can now do the set your objectives on the community hub section that really walks it through and ties it in with the CAP.
Yeah, so previously what we've had in the toolkits is that we've kind of gone through the SMART approach. So it's really just a tool to think about how you can make a sentence into an objective by putting in some measures of success in there. So essentially, instead of going through the SMART sort of technique, what we have on the Community Hub site now is this whole section on set your objectives, which includes the SMART technique, but there's just a bit more around that that can give you a bit more context and hopefully help you get through that with a bit more ease.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So that's just meant to link in nicely with this toolkit.
Yeah.
And then we also give an indicative list of who you might consider partnering with, or at least reaching out to, basic resources, beginnings to measure success, that sort of thing.
Cool. Okay, so with mapping your steps, I've noted that this toolkit is actually quite extensive. There's quite a lot of information in there. There's a table that lists off some really great examples, so I'd really encourage everybody to have a look at that. In the interest of time, we're not really going to go through that in detail today, because obviously everybody can have a look at that in their own time. But essentially, just to touch on that section, we talk about engaging with your community as a part of this planning process, finding out what the community is, where the spaces are that young people and young adults might be, or where you can sort of engage with them, if that makes sense. Providing that harm minimisation information is really important. So we know that from research that often the people who are at most risk of a particular harm will often be the least likely to actually seek out help and information about that particular topic. So it's a really important aspect of information sharing and I guess knowledge sharing in this context, that it's provided in the right format to that group. A pamphlet, a bifold pamphlet may not be the best option for a young adult heading to TAFE, for example. It might actually be a text, I don't know, it might be some kind of technology related solution, or it might be an engagement opportunity where you get to talk to that person face to face. So it's important to sort of understand how information might be consumed by that group as well. Increasing community participation is really important in this section. So having a look at how young adults in this space, in this transitionary phase in their life, will become engaged in that process. And again, Laura's kind of touched on this as well, is linking in with organisations and programs and services that are kind of already there, and promoting that collaborative approach to delivering these activities and projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, it mentions in the toolkit that a lot of school settings will now provide things like free counselling to their students, but we know that there's really low uptake of that counselling, even when people might be struggling. So even if that's promoting awareness through your partners, who maybe you're partnered with a different health and well-being organization or an activity-based club, to just get the message out there, even that this is available, and to show people really clear pathways for how to access those existing services.
Yeah, excellent. So with measuring success, we've been sort of talking about the final section in the toolkits. Within these webinars, you have examples in there around what kind of measures of success you might sort of plan into your activity from the beginning. And they're still there, but one thing I want to clarify is that some of the toolkits are a bit mismatched in terms of what the requirements are for LDATs with reporting. So definitely follow the requirements within the CAP. That specifies that you need 2 or more process measures, 1 or more impact measures. You might see a bit of variance in terms of what toolkit you look at as to the number of each of these that you might need, but yeah, just follow the things that are in your CAP, and we will capture any sort of misalignments in the next review process for these LDATs, for these toolkits. And I also wanted to touch on that outcome measures are generally outside of the scope of the LDAT program, because they're sort of longer term and much larger in scale in terms of how you go about measuring outcome measures. So if an LDAT is doing an activity where an outcome measure is being collected as part of an existing project, or it is possible for whatever reason, then obviously that's encouraged, but it's not an expectation or requirement within the process. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. In terms of examples, I think it's a good idea to always just check in with the toolkit, because they're there and you guys can have a look at that in your own time as well. Okay, let's get into the juicy stuff.
Yeah, so that's really the content of the toolkit, but what we wanted to emphasize is some of the underlying principles that went into why we talk about this cohort, and you know where our team's head was at in directing people in this way.
Yeah.
One of the things I do want to say up front is that we don't expect young adults or adults to be abstinent, but we do want to make sure that deciding to be abstinent, or even deciding to not drink on any given occasion, or to drink less, is a socially acceptable option. We usually, when we talk about stigma, we're talking about people who are alcohol or other drug dependent, but it also exists for people who don't drink, at least right now in Australia. I think that that's changing. I think it's becoming more common for people to, you know, be involved in things like Feb Fast or Dry July or any of these given initiatives, or even just to say, hey, I'm taking a break from alcohol. But depending on the drinking culture in the, you know, either the workplace or the school setting that they're in, that might be more or less socially acceptable, and we really want to see a change happen there so that people don't feel that pressure to drink to be part of a social group.
And there's also, in terms of other drugs, not just alcohol, there's, you know, contexts where this particular group is maybe going to music festivals, really common attendance there, and there might be a particular culture around drug use that is associated with peer pressure and is kind of unavoidable. If a particular group is doing something, then, you know, people have to navigate that in their own way, and may have different wishes in terms of how they go about that. So it's about having some strategies, I guess, and information around how you can not feel isolated from your group, but also still make your own choice.
To still be socially engaged without necessarily feeling the pressure to engage in that, in whatever use is happening around you. And look, we know that information is not enough to usually, but it's still important. You know, we know that there are a lot of adults out there that lack good information, whether that's good information about non-alcohol drug use, or even good information and understanding about things like the low-risk drinking guidelines. There's a lot of ignorance surrounding what is recommended by the NHMRC. So this can be a good opportunity for us to enact that sort of intergenerational change by educating people while they're still young adults and before they have an entrenched adult pattern of alcohol or other drug consumption. So in terms of some of the risk factors that are fairly specific to this cohort, social disconnection and dislocation, by which we mean there's a lot of transition happening. People might be moving cities, they might be moving out of their home for the first time. Their social group, even if they stay where they were living before, might be disrupted. You know, friends might be leaving and going to other places. Relationships undergo a lot of change during this time. Relationships with friends, relationships with your family. So there's potential there for people to feel a bit lost or confused or socially disconnected or isolated. There can also be a new exposure to certain types of negative drinking cultures, and whether that is a hard drinking university or TAFE situation, or maybe they're getting into an industry where after work drinks are a really regular occurrence, and it's not just after work drinks, it's having, you know, big after work blowouts, which we know is not terribly uncommon in some professions. There can also be an increased availability of alcohol in their area. I think schools are probably a really easy example of that. You know, when you imagine any campus.
You mean universities when you say schools?
Yeah, universities or TAFEs, you know, colleges. I'm probably slipping into my North American words that we use.
I was like, high schools? No.
But if I imagine, you know, a university campus in my mind, they probably have a couple of bars on campus, and then it is probably also surrounded by bars, running promotions like happy hour specials and whatnot, competing to get students into their specific location. So we know that increased availability tends to increase consumption. And there's also the issue of decreased parental monitoring. These might be people who are out stretching their wings, so to speak, for the first time. Might be their first time living outside of home. So there's no more curfews, there's no one watching you, there's no one who's going to quiz you when you get home, if you've been drinking and how much you've had to drink. And we also know that there are some higher risk populations within any given cohort. I know you've seen some research about LGBTI communities.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that initiation into drinking and other drug use like smoking or, just generally other drug use is quite a lot higher for people who identify as LGBTI, and that's interlinked with the kind of stigma and social sort of pressures that come with, or I guess isolation even, that come with being different to the heteronormative, essentially. I think that if an LDAT decides to go down this path of looking at young adults, it is important to have a look at and sort of do that survey of your community, which is what we talked about before, around whether these sort of higher risk cohorts exist within that cohort.
Yep.
And potentially tailor or work with an existing partner to develop content that's relevant to them and applicable to them.
Can I say something here?
Absolutely.
Please.
One organisation up in the North Coast area that's really great to work with is ACON.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yes.
And they also have a lot to do with the tropical fruits festival, etc. And I've just found them really amazing to access resources over the years. So
they're actually.
I'm gonna grab a pen and just note that.
Sure. They're actually have a Victorian office now as well, who operate. Can't remember from where exactly in Melbourne, but they represent a bunch of the southern states as well.
Okay.
So they're an excellent resource. I agree.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Really good point.
I was really impressed when I first read about their Rover program. That just seemed so ideal.
Yes.
We're actually adapting that Rover program to assist us with youth chill zones at the festivals up here in Byron Shire.
Awesome.
So we're actually working with
Fantastic.
Annie Bleeker on that one.
That's great.
Yeah, so she's putting some special training together for us on that as well.
Oh,
Great.
fantastic. We should follow that up.
Do you want to? I feel like sometimes LDATs present these webinars for us.
Yeah.
You guys have so much knowledge and experience. Okay. Cool. So let's move on, hey? Where are we? Here we go. So in terms of protective factors, obviously to define that, it's basically the things you can put into place for somebody to provide them with the skills when they do approach these situations to have the ability to say no or behave in the way that they want to behave at the time. So things like pro-social opportunities, and I guess we can talk about how this can sort of, be cut both ways, but pro-social opportunities can create a sense of connectedness to a cohort and provide that sort of similarity for people, individuals and groups to come together for a particular reason, and that can create a sense of belonging.
Forming those new, sometimes rebuilding
connections.
social networks and social connections, like especially if you've moved.
Exactly. It sort of, research shows that these sort of things can provide somebody with a sense of purpose and connection to their community, which then obviously prevents the harms that can be associated with AOD use and, that sort of feeling of isolation in these sort of transition times in someone's life. So in terms of this can be cut both ways, what we're talking about there is that if a group of young people go out, they're often going to, go out and have a drink. So in these pro-social opportunities where you go out to meet some people and you interact, like for example with O Week, there's a really strong binge drinking culture with that week. So there can be some harms associated with making these connections.
Yeah.
but it's a bit of a delicate balance, and so maybe those places where those harms are sort of at a peak, where there's a really, a big spike, maybe that's an opportunity for an LDAT if they're looking at this sort of activity to provide some really directed and pointed information at that time. So there might be specific points within this sort of transition phase in this age group to develop specific content for those periods. So around positive drinking culture, we've kind of spoken about that already, but just sort of having an understanding within a group that not drinking is okay, having one or two is okay. You don't have to get completely blind.
Yeah, it always makes me think back to the Good Sports program. Where we know that connection to a sporting club and feeling involved in that can be a protective factor, but not if there's a really heavy drinking culture within that sporting club. So programs that aim to shift the drinking cultural norms maybe in a healthier direction. Yeah,
definitely. And I guess this kind of leads nicely into good mental health. These transition times in life are obviously some of the most stressful that we can experience as people on the planet. Stress, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all that stuff tends to come up when we're, juggling a million things and changes in our lives. So they really go hand in hand.
Yeah, and new pressures, right? Whether that's pressure to succeed in your career or pressure to do well academically.
Exactly, and that's, it's really important to sort of, I guess, connect with mental health organisations and have a look at some of the resources and how they present them in terms of AOD.
And developing coping skills for stress and anxiety so that people don't wind up, self-medicating with alcohol and other drugs.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. I mean, Laura talked about earlier with creating good habits when it comes to AOD use, but there's also good habits in terms of how you manage that stress and anxiety and depression that you might experience at different points in your life. I mean, we're all pretty much guaranteed to experience that at some point in our lives, so the earlier we start to learn the skills to deal with them, the better we can protect ourselves in the future when they come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you just go to MHFA on the internet, it'll take you to the Mental Health First Aid website, and you can download and print lots and lots and lots of those guidelines, both for adults and also young people, and there's Indigenous ones, and there's even ones in various different languages as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
That's really good. There's also organisations like Red Frogs, just to think of an example off the top of my head, who I'm sure you guys will be familiar with. They provide support to provide support to school leavers during their sort of celebration times.
Nikki's a superstar when it comes to looking after school leavers.
Oh, okay, there you go. But for Shane's benefit, I'll mention that I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, Shane, but they also offer sort of support to people who might be just having a bad night, when it comes to mental health.
fully across Refuge.
Great. Okay. Cool.
I know the organisation.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
No worries. All good. So the last thing we'll talk about, I guess, is the suite of resources that the LDAT program has. There's a lot of them at the moment. We won't go through them all, I guess, one at a time, but I'll mention that there's the range of toolkits. There's a community action plan, and there's a whole section on that on the Community Hub, and the Building Successful LDAT's Practical Guide. So that's all, they all talk to each other now, so I'm not sure if you guys have had a chance to have a flick through a bunch of the toolkits or not, but essentially each of the sections, so when it comes to overview, planning, mapping your steps, and measuring success, they will all have similar language and interlinks with the CAP template. And then the CAP will also refer to sections within the toolkits. And obviously the practical guide will have that in it as well. So we really encourage LDATs to have a look at them sort of next to each other as you go through your planning process and throughout your projects, I guess. So that's kind of it from us.